Thank you, Senator Johnson, Ranking Member Peters, for having this important oversight hearing today. And of course, Acting Commissioner Morgan, appreciate you being here in person with us today as well. I want to talk a little bit about the entry restrictions for children. So on March 21st, 2020, CDC and DHS suspended admission of certain immigrants, regardless of their country of origin, purportedly due to the health concerns of COVID-19. Reports indicate that under new policy, DHS has deported nearly 3,000 unaccompanied children arriving at the U.S. border instead of transferring them to the Office of Refugee Resettlement Custody as required by federal anti-trafficking law. The Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, or TVPRA, as it's a lot easier to say that, the removal really places these children at risk of human trafficking, persecution, and other grave harm. So is CBP transferring unaccompanied children arriving at the U.S. southern border to ORR custody and screening them as required by law?
So the answer is yes and no. So Title 42, and I think this is important, again, being obvious here, but as we're in this, in the midst of this public health pandemic, this global pandemic, the priority must be to contain and mitigate the spread of this virus and to keep it from further being introduced in the U.S. But ma'am, I can assure you that CBP, through implementing the CDC order, it's consistent with law, policy, including our now non-refoulement obligations.
Can you tell me how many, do you know how many unaccompanied children you've removed since March 21st?
Yes, I have those numbers.
And then while you're looking for those, do you have the number of how many weren't screened for trafficking or protection concerns? Because
Yes.
that's what we're concerned about.
Yes, ma'am. So I have this down. I'll make sure that I'll follow up with my staff to make sure the numbers are right. But approximately under Title 42, the CDC order, about 2,000 were processed under Title 42, and just shy of 300 were processed under Title 8. And they would go to the normal procedure through.
So only 300 were screened out of the 2,000?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. So they're all screened. And
They
again,
were 100% of these kids were screened for trafficking and protection concerns?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So that doesn't change. So we're still, if we see anybody, any signs that someone's trafficked, then they're going to fall out of Title 42, and they're going to be then treated under
Okay,
Title.
regardless of seeing of signs, the regulation is all unaccompanied minors are screened. You're screening all unaccompanied minors. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, ma'am. We are complying with our non-refoulement requirements under the law. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on a little bit now to a little bit of transparency and oversight, as is the this is a commission hearing on oversight. And so Nevada, of course, we're home to thousands of immigrant families. They make up the part of the diverse fabric of our state and of our country. And too often, unfortunately, I hear concerns from our state's immigrant community and advocates about DHS oversight when it comes to investigating abuse by ICE and CBP personnel, including sometimes racist remarks made by Border Patrol agents at the southern border. So can you please give us a little insight into what accountability measures are in place for CBP agents and their officers who engage in verbal abuse or other forms of misconduct directed at immigrants?
It's handled like any allegation of misconduct, ma'am. So we have a robust Internal Affairs Office of Professional Responsibility. It used to be called
So
Internal
could you
Affairs.
describe the grievance process then? The immigrant has to make the claim, another officer makes the claim. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Well, it depends on the circumstance, but if an individual, if an immigrant feels that they have been mistreated in any form or fashion, yes.
So what is their process? If I'm an immigrant, I'm in custody at the border, I've been a victim of some form of abuse or comment, how do I go about talking about that?
There's a variety of options to them.
Just
ma'am.
give me one
I
example.
could give you one. They could report it to a supervisory CBPO or Border Patrol agent.
And then where does it, like, where is the oversight in there that they have some way to get their claim heard?
Right, so then the process is then that claim, like for this example, if it's reported to supervisor, border patrol agent, or CBPO, then that allegation will immediately go to our joint intake center and our Office of Professional
And have you conducted an
Responsibility.
independent review of this process?
Yes, yes, we actually have a cadre of hundreds of special agents that this is what they do. Their full-time job is to investigate allegations.
And so
of
have you
misconduct.
produced reports of this independent review? Is there something that we can look at and see?
Yes, ma'am, every year. Every year, in fact, the 2018 report just recently came out.
Well, it's 2020, so can we see, can we see that? Can you please direct that to us so we can see how the grievance process
Yes, ma'am,
is?
we work with your staff and get you whatever current information we have, absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess that we could also talk a little bit, I guess I have about a minute left, and so how about if we talk a little bit about the Remain in Mexico program, the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP. You know, 2 months ago, DHS and Office of Immigration Review announced they're going to be rescheduling all those MPP hearings due to COVID-19. So people in Mexico awaiting their court dates, they're forced to travel to their destination port only to find that their date, they've traveled unnecessarily only to find that their date has been changed, to receive notice that they have a new hearing date. And so I think this is a short-sighted policy, and how do we be sure that people aren't traveling just to find out that they can't get there? So can you tell me how many immigrants waiting in Mexico for their scheduled court date were required to make the journey back just to receive notice of the postponed court dates?
So I'm not aware of that, ma'am. My understanding was we communicated that out. If those circumstances where they had to come, we can take a look at that. And
I'd
we
like
can
to see some numbers on that if I
Yes, ma'am.
could.
We can get better at that. But I can assure you, the decision behind continuing to postpone this, I fully support. I mean, as Mexico cases continue to rise, deaths continue to rise, and really in the Western Hemisphere, Brazil now has become the epicenter. Latin America really has become higher than the European countries as far as the number of cases. So it's still a
So
real threat.
if you're going to change the court date and you're going to require someone to come in person to receive that TARE notice or however that notice is, can you modify that policy to let them know so they don't have to make this trip unnecessarily just to find out that they can't be there?
My understanding, that wasn't happening, but if that was, yes, ma'am, we can get better at that.
I appreciate that. I look forward to hearing those numbers. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.